Hey guys, so this is our next topic, and it's all about congruency of figures. So by the end of this video, you're going to be able to list the congruent parts of congruent figures and finding any missing measurements. And that's the big key to this, is finding the missing measurements. So the first thing we need to do is define what congruency means. Okay, congruent figures, if they're congruent, then any pair of corresponding parts are congruent. So that means, like, I can take any one of these, and if I rotate it, all the sides and the angles are going to match up no matter how I arrange it. Okay, so those corresponding parts are, we're talking about side lengths and angles. So we deal with this mostly with triangles. So if we go to our example, okay, and you might want to write this down as a definition, okay? Two triangles are congruent if all three pairs of sides are congruent and all three pairs of angles are congruent. So if we look up at this diagram, you see that there's tick marks on each one of the sides and arcs for each one of those angles. So the first thing we do is we list that stuff out. So angle A is congruent to angle R. Angle B is congruent to angle S. Angle C is congruent to angle T. And you can tell that by the different marks. We can also list out the congruent sides. So AB is congruent to RS. BC is congruent to ST, and AC is congruent to RT. So those are the sides that have the same tick marks. Once we know that all the angles are congruent and all the sides are congruent, we can make what is called a congruency statement. So a congruency statement it states what is congruent. So what are we trying to prove is congruent? Well, we're trying to prove these triangles are congruent. So the congruency statement is triangle ABC is congruent, remember that symbol, the equal sign with the squiggly on top, is congruent to triangle RST. So that's my congruency statement once I have all these sides and angles congruent. So if we're doing this, okay, and what they do in some examples is if triangle XYZ is congruent to triangle RST, name the corresponding congruent angles and congruent sides. So what you want to do is you want to kind of match up some things. Well, first off, we can match up the sides, okay? So YZ is congruent to ST. We know XZ is congruent to RT. So therefore, we also know that XY is congruent to RS, because that's the unknown side. We also match up the angles. And the best thing about the congruency statement is it's already matched up. So X is the first, R is the second, because order matters. So angle X is going to be congruent to angle R. Angle Y is going to be congruent to angle S. And angle Z is going to be congruent to angle T. And we can also see in the side lengths, okay, every time we see X, it matches up with R. So you see how X is the first, R is the first, X is the first, R is the first. Same thing with Y and S, and Z and T. So order does matter with these things. Okay? So that's where this comes in. When we have a congruency statement like this, we just match up those letters, okay? So T would go to C, O would go to A, P would go to N. So we can answer questions like this. So angle, remember that's the angle symbol, top is congruent to angle can. Angle OPT, okay, OPT is congruent to ANC. Because O matches up with A, P matches up with N, T matches up with C. Angle PTO is congruent to NCA. Okay? So, again, you're just matching up the letters. Okay? What's congruent to CA? Well, TO. What's congruent to AN? OP. Okay? And CN would match up with TP. Okay? So that's the best thing about congruency statements is it matches up what angles and what sides are congruent. So this is another example of that you guys can do. Okay? Remember to list the corresponding angles and sides. Okay? And then fill in using that same order. This is going back to showing all of your congruent angles and sides. Okay? What I want to mention is number 2 here, because there's some shared area here. So what we can do, we'll just start naming the sides. Okay? Well, every time they overlap like this, I find it easy to kind of just label some stuff or draw it separately. Okay? So if I draw this really quickly separately, okay? 2, 3, 1, 2. This one, do you see how this side matches up with the AC? So I'm going to kind of rotate this triangle around so it looks like the other one. Okay? That would put angle B here, okay, D here, and C up here. So the trick is that now, because they have the overlap, naming the angles, we need to use 3 letters versus just the 1. Okay? The sides are going to be the easy part. Okay? Once we rotate it, AB is going to match up with DC. AC is going to match up with DB. And BC is going to match up with CB. You notice BC, now CB, because I rotated the figure. So now I'm going to have to name the angles, okay, using 3 letters. Okay, remember when you're naming angles with 3 letters, the vertex goes in the middle. So, angle BAC is congruent to angle CDB, the one arc there. Angle ABC is going to be congruent to angle DCB, this top angle here. And angle ACB is going to be congruent to angle DBC. The bottom angle is right there. Now, once I know all those angles are going to be the same, now I write a congruency statement. That congruency statement, again, is what triangles are congruent. So, triangle ABC is going to be congruent to triangle DCB, this triangle here. And that's my congruency statement. So remember to try to rotate and try to describe the diagram, make them match up. It makes it easier for you when you're naming the angles and naming the sides if they're in the same orientation. Okay? Then we go to actually solving for x. So this is all about matching up. Okay? Remember, there's this congruency statement up here that says triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. So A is going to match up with D, B is going to match up with E, and C is going to match up with F. So that's the biggest thing, is you want to make sure you're looking at the congruency statement and you're matching up correctly. So let's say I'm going to find the value of X or Y. Well, let's match this up, okay? This is an angle, this is a side, right? I can tell by the degrees, I can tell by just this being on the outside. So let's see what we can match up here. Well, this is EF, right? Well, what matches up with EF in the other triangle? BC. So that's this triangle right here. So I know 2x plus y, because they're congruent, has to equal 90.6. Well, I can't solve an equation with x and y. So let's move on to try to figure out if we can find out what x or y is. Well, this is an angle D, right? Well, what matches up with angle D? Angle A. Okay, so now I know that 2y minus 5 equals 65. Okay, so now I can solve that one. Add 5, 2y equals 70. I divide by 2, y is 35. I've solved for y. Now what can I do with that? Plug it in here. So now I take that and I go 2x plus 35 equals 90.6. Subtract 35 on both sides. Okay, and I get 2x equals 55.6. Okay, I divide by 2, and x turns out to be 27.8. Now I've solved for both x and y using my congruent figures because I know they match up. Okay, so please try to complete this worksheet, okay, and then come in next class with any questions or comments because we're going to be practicing those skills.